still have this month's bills, which
Balance.
would automatically be included anyway. And that would be about $35,000. But he's telling me he'll have about $11,000 left over.
Okay, motion made and probably second. I guess as far as question, the only thing I have is, it is a precedent. And we do for one, when it comes back, we will have to do for all. And I hope, the chief and county administrator is prepared to deal with that, with the program plans that y'all have had. So, work for you all, chief. Okay.
Mr. Rizzo,
Right.
can I bring up
And
something?
I'm sure I knew no mistake. I know you've talked to the chief.
He's
I'm
the one
sure
that
of that.
recommended to me that
Yeah, but
we do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't talked to him about it but I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that domino effect is going on.
No, I understand, but I think as long as we're talking about the same dominoes, Mr. Chairman, then I have no problem with it. As long as we're talking about the same circumstances, then I think we need to do that. It's just because the people they have contracted with cannot do the work in this year before June 30th. I don't know that we need to penalize them for not being able to do the work in next year's budget.
Right, and wouldn't want to penalize
No,
them.
I understand.
I just want to make sure we treat everybody the same.
I understand completely.
Moving forward, okay. Mr. Vice Chairman?
Yes, I guess it's more for Mr. Ashcraft. I think at our last budget discussion, we were talking about the possibility of removing the videotaping services to save $6,000 or $7,000. And I didn't see that in here as one of the things. Is that something we're not going to do now?
That's
or?
correct. That's still in the budget, sir.
So it's still in the
It
budget?
is, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I think, and they are, I mean, it's not, I know there was some concern about they're only broadcast on certain cable networks, which we need to fix that.
Right.
But they are put on the website, so they're available for all citizens. I think that's a big thing. Okay, so that's back in the budget.
And we also receive a grant from MetroCast to help offset that.
I was going to ask if we were going to get
We haven't collected yet, but we are pursuing
Okay.
it.
I'm sure.
They'll pay it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That was my question, Mr. Roselle.
All right.
Okay,
What else
I
do we
got
need
the
to
motion
do?
on the floor.
Yeah, I don't know how we need to do it, Mrs. Hatcher, but just so we get to $31,000 from this year's budget to the next year's budget, so they can fix their roof on the building as well as seal their blacktop.
Typically, if we were under the purchase order system, which hopefully by this time next year we will be, that would be a moot point because any purchase order would be approved by the board to be rolled over anyway.
So do we need to do anything special with this?
You need to pass a resolution to amend the current year budget
As amended.
as amended.
All right.
Was that your motion?
Was that your motion, Mr.
Yeah,
Davis?
that's my motion, but I want $31,000
Yes.
transfer. Okay, that's my motion.
With the addition of the 31,000.
Who seconded it?
Yes.
You seconded it?
Okay,
Can you re-second?
I'll resecond.
motion made and by Mr. Akers, second by Mr. Popowitz. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same.
Thank you.
Motion carried. All right, next we'll look at item 10. Mr. Borchak, how are you this evening, sir?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. What we have here is the first reading for some changes to the ordinance sections that cover the water and wastewater sections of the county code. As you know, the Commonwealth requires that anything on the water and wastewater rates be handled as an ordinance issue, so we had to bring those modifications to the board at any rate. And since I've been here, I've also been looking at the overall ordinances and trying to bring them up to date. And so we thought this would be the opportune time to bring that together with the rate issues and really look at some fairly major modifications to the ordinances. While they're major in deletions particularly, the overall scope of the ordinance remains essentially the same. What we'll be looking at in summary on the modifications over and above the rate issues is to go through the water and the wastewater sections and remove all of the individual references to fees and rates and things of that nature, and simply insert the language essentially referring to a single schedule of rates, so that in the future when any rates or fees are changed, they only need to be changed in one place. And the language will incorporate that into the rest of the ordinance. We'll also be looking at removing all the references to the Milford Sanitary District as a separate district now that the county system is essentially looked upon as one combined system. We're also looking at taking out many of the references in the ordinance currently referred to the Department of Public Works. We simply want to bring that up to date to reference the Department of Public Utilities. And the other issue is to look at the portion of the ordinance that specifies circumstances under which a rebate or a refund can be made on a water and sewer bill, and simply allow that to be approved at the department level, as opposed to bringing it every time before the Board of Supervisors anytime somebody wants to have their water bill adjusted. So that kind of summarizes the changes that we have in the ordinance. I believe the whole package is about 75 pages. So with that, we would recommend that as the first reading, we could then go ahead and put it on the agenda for July 13th for a public hearing.
Okay, this is the first reading for the proposed amendment. And are there questions of Mr. Borchak on any of the issues brought forward? Mr. Popowitz? All right.
Those are
Mr. Akers?
No, I like the idea that John has gone through, and I like the idea that we're trying to update that. I think we should allow the department to make those decisions as far as rebates and those type of things if water breaks. It doesn't need to come to the board for those type of ideas. I like what he has done.
Okay. Mr. Seeley?
Couple questions.
Yes, sir.
The bottom of the page for the actual, that was sort of the staff's recommendation, on mine it said, will not exceed one rebate in any 3, and then
Year
it
period.
stops.
Calendar years.
No, it says
Oh,
here.
Right.
year period.
Yes.
So
And
3 in a year?
that's typical of what most jurisdictions do. They have like, so if you come in and you get a rebate or an adjustment on your bill from that date, unless there are very extenuating circumstances, there would be no additional refund during that period of 3 years.
Okay. 3 in a year, I was looking for 3 in a 3-year period, 1 a year or something. I have one other question, and it concerns rates. And we're currently providing water to Lake Caroline, and we keep talking about a bulk water rate. And we really don't have a bulk water rate identified. What size connection do they have? Is it a 3-inch or a 4-inch?
They have a 4-inch meter, and they're paying based on what we would charge for a commercial
For a
customer.
single customer user for a 4-inch rate connection?
Yes.
And one of the things, and this goes back to our long-standing, how do we handle temporary connections? When we have a group that's over 100 users that's connected to us to one connection, when you look at the per unit cost going on in Lake Caroline right now, you're looking at around $13 a home, maybe even less. When I looked at the water bill that they had for 1 month, it was $13,000, which is almost 1 million gallons. When I look at what it costs us to actually produce that for all those homes, for the quality that we're expected to have, I would like to see us have a case where when there's more than 50 connections or some number, 100 connections, to one meter, that the rate be altered, because we're really providing water to one user who is then subdividing that cost out to a bunch of users, which I don't think is fair to the people that we have as users in Belmont. And I've gotten a number of comments from folks we're providing water, they're getting this hugely reduced rate, everybody else is subsidizing it. Is it possible to write something that into the ordinance, over 100 users, over 200 users, with different connections and up that cost? Because it does cost us more. It's not like 4 users. If it was a company, they're there Monday through Friday, let's say 8 to 10 o'clock at night. It's different than providing to a number of houses, and we have a number of subdivisions that could look at this and go, hey, that's a good deal if I'm the provider. I think it's time we look at that. This has been going on for some time, and I'd like to see us amend the ordinance to some manner like that and up the rate so that it's not costing everybody so much.
I agree with much of what you're saying, Mr. Seeley, and in fact, one of the things that I want to do kind of in the next iteration is look at how we can address any of these larger community-type things and essentially look at the criteria that we'd have to come up with really to write a specific contract for that entity, whether it be like Caroline or anybody else that would come on with a large enough number of connections to actually come up with a bulk user contract or agreement that would be, for a certain period of time and, with the rate renewable over so many years. So that is, I've been looking at that for an iteration. One thing that you have to consider also, with the rate that we charge, of course, the customers in the county, part of that rate includes the maintenance we do on the lines in front of their homes and things of that nature, which, of course, we do not do at Lake Caroline. That's the responsibility of Ladysmith Water. But there really does need to be some, for each one of these community groupings, we really do need to sit down and see just what the cost for that specific community is and come up with a separate agreement for each one.
Well, my concern is that they're charging the folks inside Lake Caroline for unlimited use $45 per house. We're getting right around 13. That's a heck of a deal. How hard is it for us to make an exception for a temporary connection with some X number of users that, would only be a subdivision to allow us to actually do that now, since we're in this situation, and I don't know that there's any chance that it's going to resolve itself anytime soon. Is that something we can look at while we're doing this now?
Do we have time to look at that, Mr. County Attorney? Would that?
I mean, is that out of, we're providing a water company water at a hugely, per customer rate reduced. And I think that there's no impetus for them to move forward when they've got such a deal. So we need to somehow make them bring their water line back, their water plant back online, and relieve the county of this additional stress that we haven't planned on.
Although at this point, that's in the hands of the State
I understand.
Corporation Commission.
I understand that completely. But I think this is an opportunity, and this is the time we're reviewing this ordinance, and I think this is the time to work on that and get that in place. And if we already have a customer that's doing this, and to try to implement that.
Well, if the county attorney thinks we have the time to incorporate it into this go-round, we can certainly look at it.
We can certainly look at it. We can certainly change the rate, but I don't know the effect that might have on, the matters that are going on before the
I understand, but it's definitely straining our resources.
Well, I think once we let them do the researches, and let's see if it really is straining our resources, because the folks in Lake Caroline, for example, they pay for their own distribution cost. All the distribution costs they pay, so it's different than anybody who lives in, compared to Belmont. It's a big difference because we have to fix the pipes that they break.
No, I understand
in Lake
that.
Caroline, we don't.
But we are putting stress on a system and on our other users. I think water quality-wise, we're stressing all other users trying to provide such a large quantity of water a month.
Okay. And this good discussion. We'll get close to taking it offline, I guess, the rest of it, because maybe there's some more information we need Mr. Akers had a question.
Yeah, I think so, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure Mr. Seeley is really painting a true picture of what's really going on over there. First of all, the State Corporation Commission, basically they have said they have to buy water from the county. They cannot upgrade their plant. So you're going to put a community in a situation where they do not have water. But secondly, we keep talking about it is costing more to produce the water than what we're getting for it. I have heard Mr. Borshak, I've heard other utility directors complain the fact that we did not have enough customers online where the water was flowing fast enough and through the pipes well enough to keep the smells down and the other issues that were with the water. Now, you're saying that we're putting stress on the system. I've not heard Mr. Borshak say that it's putting a stress on the system. Now, have we had to dig additional wells? Absolutely. Is that for Lake Caroline? Absolutely not. It was for the other communities that we were planning for and that we had to come online. I have no problem in looking at the cost versus what we receive. Now, we talk about $13,000. We've had months $20,000, and so it's been variable. But I have no problem in looking at it. But I just want us to be able to look at it fairly, look at it at all the cost involved, and we need to look at all the issues that we're talking about. Now, if my understanding, and again, I'm not picking on any community, but we sell bulk, if you will, sewage service to one of the communities. And I'm not, I'm not trying
You
to...
can go ahead and say it.
I'm sorry?
You can go ahead and say it.
Okay, Campbell's Creek. We sell bulk service to Campbell's Creek Sewer. Now, that's where your cost is at, buddy.
Well,
if you want to talk about cost, that's
not
what's
arguing
really
it, but
costing you.
We don't have a bulk rate anywhere in any of these ordinances. So when we say bulk, I mean, at some point in time, we have to do something about what bulk means and what that cost is to everybody else. Because we have transferred a lot of money from the general fund to utilities over history.
But it has not been to provide water to Lake Caroline in the last year.
I'm not
what the money was transferred
I'm not saying
for.
it is. I'm just saying we have transferred up to $780,000 in one given year to utilities. And if we continue down this with regulations getting more stringent, water quality, wastewater outputs, we're going to have to absorb that cost. And if it's bulk, we need to figure out what that means, and it needs to be in the ordinance. But when we're providing to a whole subdivision at the rate that we're doing it, it has put stress because we have put on additional wells. They're working a lot harder. And the problem with the water in Belmont isn't the usage. It's not circular. It's dead-end lines that just stop, which causes water quality issues. I won't argue that point at all.
Mr. Vice Chairman, you have a question?
I did, and it was kind of similar along the lines to what Mr. Celia asked and what Mr. Akers said. Mr. Borshak, you're probably aware that I've been in contact with Mr. Schiebel on the same thing, and I think you've got the data because we basically took the cost that Lake Caroline had, divided that by the number of homes, got a per home cost, and then we compiled all the bills in Belmont. Just for example, we didn't do anywhere else, but we just did Belmont, and then divided that by the number of houses to get somewhat of a fair comparison. And it's almost a fair comparison, which I think the rest of the board should have. The one thing we're missing is we need somewhere in Public Works to say, or excuse me, utilities, to say actually what our maintenance costs are. And if you can put the maintenance costs together, I think we can just lay it out and we could all go from the numbers. Because you'll see, it's like $15 to $25, something like that. But, and I wish I could see it, but I mean, that's the one thing we need. If you could get us that while we're reviewing the ordinance, it could help him work better with the numbers.
What we have to remember, though, as far as what I think you're referring to in maintenance costs, there are maintenance costs on the county system. We have no maintenance costs at Lake Caroline.
Right.
Once it passes their meter, all of the maintenance costs are on them. So,
but we did last year, a few years ago maybe, have a water pressure issue because there was, I'm not sure what the problem was, but there was an issue.
In Lake Caroline?
in Lake Caroline?
The entire Carmel Church.
Oh.
It was like a Saturday or Sunday. I remember the director calling me at home saying, I just want you to know that we don't have any water pressure in Carmel Church. And that may have been part of the whole thing. Hopefully, we've corrected that. You can tell me later.
Yes.
Just one other question.
Okay, another separate point.
Oh, yeah. What is POTW? It's all through the ordinance for wastewater, and I can't find it spelled out anywhere.
It's publicly operated treatment works. If it's not in the definitions,
It's not in the definitions, let's just
probably
add
should
it.
be, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Seeley. Mr. Vice Chairman?
That was it, Mr. Chairman. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, I think you probably have a couple of areas you can look at and provide us some information with. And hope you got a clear direction of what you need to provide us, right?
Okay, got
Okay.
it. Thank you.
All right, and do we need to make a motion to bring this back on July?
July
Mr.
13th.
Are you going
Can
to
we continue the first reading?
Or move it to public hearing?
I'd like to continue the first reading.
Do we have any timelines that we have to meet?
It's simply a budgetary issue. Until the ordinance is actually approved, we'll still be operating at last year's rates.
But July 1 is when we start the new billing?
We don't have a meeting.
If the ordinance is approved in July, then the July bill, which goes out in August, will be under the new rates.
Can we not go ahead and advertise for the public hearing? And if Jeff has additional questions, he can ask those at the beginning and then open the public hearing and move on through the process. And if everybody's pleased, we can then vote on it that night so that the changes can go in effect July 1.
I'm amenable to that.
And you can do a second phase, too. If there's an issue
Right.
still, we can adopt it. I mean, we can do it twice.
Okay.
Not that we want to, but if we can do it twice, we got to do it once to get it in.
Okay. And Tony said that works too, so
Jennifer?
July 13th is the public hearing date. Do we need to
Need a motion?
need a motion for?
So moved, Mr. Chairman, that we have a public hearing on the proposed amendment to Chapter 92 sewers and Chapter 112 water of the Code of Caroline County.
Second.
Motion made and probably second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same. Motion carries. And the board will now take a recess.
Thank you.
We'll now reconvene the Caroline County Board of Supervisors meeting. And at this time
We'll see.
of the meeting, we'll allow those citizens who would like to come and make public comments. And we do have one public hearing tonight, which is on the Article 12 of Code of Caroline County, license tax. If you would wait to speak to that item during that period, we would appreciate that. But at this time, if there are any citizens who would like to address the board on any matter, please come forward, state your name and your voting district. Any citizens who would like to address the board on any matter? Please state your name, sir, and your voting district.
My name is Bernard Collins. I'm from Bowling Green District. First of all, I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I commend each one of you, Board of Supervisors, who have given the time and efforts in the county. I watch it on television. You people have a hard job, and we in the county depend on what your development is going to bring us in the next 10 years, and also what our county debt is going to be. I'm pretty familiar with what the debt is right now. It would be interesting to know what the debt was 10 years ago, but more importantly, it's going to be interesting to know what the debt's going to be 10 years from now. And you gentlemen certainly have a hard job, and I appreciate it. The railroad station that is being talked about and considered in Caroline County will be a great asset. It'll be a great asset to have a railroad station and a parking lot so that the people in Caroline County can use the rail. It would be good if it's at Carmel Church. It would be good if it's anywhere else in the county. Milford could have it if you could have a railroad station and a parking lot. I remember the old days when we had railroad stations, which were maintained by the railroads. I would hope that you could get the railroad to pay for the station. They're going to benefit from it, and I appreciate that. Lastly, I'd just like to talk. I know that we're talking about developing another subdivision. And I've looked and been here for many years, and I know that we have Haymont Townfield, Ladysmith Village, South River, Pendleton, Brattle Woods, Belmont, Maury Heights, Brookwood. Some of these are very nice subdivisions. They're very good. But how many spaces in there are there to build on? And more importantly, how many of those are open spaces that have never been built on? The board is considering another subdivision. I would think that you probably have the figures on how many more open spaces that you have before you decide on another subdivision. I could speak longer, but I appreciate your efforts, and I appreciate the opportunity to just bring up those points. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Are there any other citizens who would like to address the board at this time? Are there any citizens who would like to address the board? Are there any citizens who would like to address the board during the public comment period? All right, hearing none, we'll close the public comment period. Next, we have a public hearing. We have a public hearing to amend Article 12 of the Code of Caroline County, license tax. And Mr. Wilson, are you going to address this issue this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the board. This is your public hearing for the capping of your business license tax at $120,000 a year. The purpose of the amendment is to cap the maximum amount of the business professional occupational license tax paid by any individual person or business in any 1 year at $120,000. The people, yes, sir.
Mr. Wilson, we're having a hard time hearing up here. Could you maybe just get a little closer to that mic? Thank you.
Yes, sir. How's
Sorry
that?
to do that to you.
Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Thank you.
To recap, it is an ordinance change that allows the capping of the B-poll, the license tax, at $120,000 a year for any one business in that year. It is a pro-business measure that will serve the county businesses in the future and provide an incentive for existing businesses to expand employment and investment without penalty. Business growth of existing firms through capping the B-poll tax is an economical means by which the county can prosper and the county's business community can increase their profitability and help reduce county unemployment. It also makes us more competitive with existing communities around us that either have no B-poll or a capped B-poll tax themselves. There is no financial negative impact for the county. At this time, there is no one firm that is paying this amount in B-poll taxes, so the budget will not be reduced, or revenues will not be reduced, rather, through the passage of this amendment to the ordinance.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Any questions of Mr. Wilson before we open the public hearing? All right. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, sir.
All right. At this time, we will open our public hearing for the ordinance to amend Article 12, License Tax, Chapter 103 of the Code of Caroline County, Virginia, to provide for a maximum limit on the tax to be paid thereunder. All right. The public hearing is now open. Are there any citizens who would like to speak on this public hearing? Are there any citizens who would like to speak on this public hearing? Are there any citizens who would like to speak on this public hearing? Hearing none, it is now declared closed. Gentlemen, how would you like to deal with this very important issue?
Second.
All right. You didn't get to finish. Okay. Motion's been made and properly second that we approve the ordinance as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same. Motion carried. And with that, I hope that we'll see some benefits real soon in the county, that we show that Caroline County is a business-strong community, and we're looking for any business that would like to come and do their business in Caroline County. And that particular ordinance will make sure that we are on the leading edge in the future. Okay, next item, we have the unfinished business of RZ 08-2009 Virginia Land Investment LLC applicant. Mr. Fincham, are you going to guide the board through this process this evening? I'm sure you'll get some questions or follow-up. The applicants are here, Mr. Sloan and Mr. Thompson. Good to see you this evening.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm here to, I guess, answer any questions that the board has in terms of follow-up. Pursuant to the public hearing, the county attorney's office, staff, and counsel for the applicant have completed the review of the proffers and development regulations as we discussed at the May 25th meeting. There have been some clarifications or technical changes that have been discussed back and forth amongst the various parties to clean up the language in those respective documents. But none of those would be deemed to be substantial modifications that materially affect the application and would otherwise require an additional public hearing by the board. Basically, it's the technical cleanup that we typically do. At the public hearing, a number of people spoke about the project. Staff advised that we would follow up with some questions that were raised by some of the residents in proximity to the project. We have made contact with 3 of the 4 parties involved. In the 4th, I have left a message with that applicant, and I also have a follow-up meeting scheduled with one of the neighbors later on this week. The areas of concern that I think I'll attempt to summarize from those specific neighbors were access to the property, concerned about whether existing roads such as Pennsylvania Avenue, Opal Lane, etc., would be utilized for access, and the answer is no. There are separate access points off of Route 1 for this project, and access would be limited to those points of access shown on the plan. An additional concern was that of buffers to existing residents in the area. By ordinance, a buffer equivalent to the setback requirement for the abutting zoning district is required. So for example, if you have an R1 zoning, then you have to have the equivalent R1 setback as a buffer in this project to that to any abutting properties that are zoned R1. You'd have the comparable setbacks for other zoning classifications. So the issue of the buffers, I think, is spelled out in the ordinance and is not subject to modification. There were also some questions about how this might affect land values and taxes, and I think we discussed those issues with the individual. And with that, I think the questions related to this project on the neighbors, we have either resolved directly with them or have those answers and have provided them. With that, I'm open to any questions that the board has. I have at the last meeting, Supervisor Seeley gave me his initial list of questions. I have started to try to address those questions for him. he indicated tonight that he might have some follow-up questions as well. So I'll answer anything that the board may have.
Okay. All right, Mr. Popowitz, do you have questions of staff?
I do not have questions of staff. I think that this project is what it is, and I think everybody knows how I feel about it.
Okay, Mr. Akers?
Mr. Fincham, at the last meeting, my question and concern dealt with the fact that did not want to see another normal subdivision or subdivision without some type of centerpiece core.
Yes, sir.
The rail station was going to be the core for this common church station.
Yes, sir.
And the developer has put into his new proffers a provision that indicates that until the train station is in operation, on page 10, middle of the page, coordinating commercial,
Yes, sir.
that they would proffer that for every dwelling in a phase area, they would agree to provide 120 square feet of commercial use.
Yes, sir.
How do you, and your department, how do you feel about that? Number one. Number two, how do you enforce something like that and make sure that the developer's doing what he says he's going to do?
I'm going to ask you to put on your memory hat back to Haymount. And if you
Back to Haymount, right, that's been quite a while ago.
And if you may recall, we had some similar discussions with that project. The tie between the amount of commercial development and the amount of residential development.
Right.
And I think the statement was made then and probably still holds true today that developers are reluctant to tie the amount of commercial to residential. The argument typically is that the rooftops drive the residential development. Drive the commercial development. I think a concept like this is something that we have tried to get developers to commit to, and for the reasons I previously stated, they have not been willing to do that.
Right.
I think this represents a step forward in the efforts to tie residential development to commercial development and vice versa. And at the 120 square feet, if the train station was not built as contemplated, you would still have around 800,000 square feet of retail and office space that would be constructed based upon this modification. So I think the concern about too much residential and not enough commercial
Right.
Is attempting to be addressed by this suggested language in the proffer statement.
Okay. So we've talked about precedent tonight, so this sets a precedent for us in future rezonings if they come before us, that from this point on, we need to require those types of, or that type of language to be included in any rezoning request as far as proffers are concerned. We've talked about a lot of the developments that we have approved. They've all come in and they've indicated to us, we're going to build, this commercial, or we're going to put in that type of commercial, and some of it hasn't come to pass.
Yes, sir.
And but also, I think this helps us to protect the integrity of the project itself and what it intends to do.
Yes, sir. And we would actually administer this through the subdivision and site plan process.
Got you. Thank you.
When a plat comes in, we will check to make sure that these thresholds are met.
Before the next phase is approved by your department, you're going to make sure that they have started the construction of the commercial in the first phase.
Yes, sir. We'll make sure that this is done. You also have another bite at the apple. If you remember, we've got the regulating plan to be developed.
Right.
And the charrette. So
yeah,
there are additional checks and balances in there to help make sure this is addressed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all my questions.
Okay, Mr. Seeley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fincham, one of the questions, and you just dumped a whole bunch of new stuff on us this evening that we haven't got a chance to look at. Let me be upfront with everybody about that. But I see one of the major issues, there is no time frame, no number of homes tied to when the bridges will be built over the railroad tracks. Until, to me, that is one of the biggest bottlenecks going, and there's nothing that ties it, and if there is, I haven't been able to read it yet, to when that will take place, because we're bottlenecked in the first phase to 207. And we talk about relocating the entrance and all kinds of things on that as well. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just thinking about.
And those overpasses, CSX built overpasses 10, 12 years ago, all the ones they're going to build. But we don't have anything that ties when those will be built. And I know that you have the traffic in here when it becomes a level D inside the subdivision. What do we do if it's level F at 207 and whatever the entrance is? Because there is no other way out. Go ahead. I'll stop there.
That's fine. I think you just hit on the control factor, Mr. Seeley. It's the level of service. The level of service is not internal. The level of service that is critical is at your exterior intersections. I would suggest to you that you cannot get a significant level of residential development or even commercial development for that matter without meeting or exceeding the level of service D, even if there are significant improvements to the intersections of Route 1 and 207. So I think the level of service at those intersections is a major controlling factor that's going to dictate and force those internal overpasses to be constructed. And there is no obligation on the part of Caroline County to construct those overpasses over CSX. That is a cost of development, and it's up to the developer to secure the funding to make those improvements.
The way I read this, it's only internal is all that the developer is required to fix.
No, sir. They have to meet the level of service D at the existing or at any intersection onto a state road. That is a standard.
But they could stop there and leave the traffic as it is. There's nothing tying them to building those overpasses.
Again, you can't get to portions of this property without those overpasses being constructed.
Okay, let's talk about portions because phase 1, I got to find, is how many dwellings?
Phase 1 is 390 dwellings. In addition to your map here, there's also the spreadsheet which accompanies the map, which has the actual number of dwellings per phase. That is different than the land bay figures that are included elsewhere in the proffer statement. You have a proffer statement that has the land bays and has the total number of residential units, commercial and office development within that entire land bay. So for example, this pink area here is land bay A.
Right.
Land bay A actually is broken down into phase 1, 2, 3, and 8. So there are 8 different phases within land bay 8, land bay A.
Well, and that's good because in the back of this, there's a chart, and it says 2013 residential. There's no phase, no A, B, but it says 722 units.
Which page are you on, Mr. Seeley?
Well, you know, there's no page numbers on this. It is, It says March 9th, page 2, March 9th, 2010, page 2 of the McGuire Woods, I guess it's a memo.